Guaranteed. Okay.
Good.
Okay, it's a lot of pressure to start off with. But Autumn, welcome to the Progress Pure podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm super excited to talk to you today and to learn more about intermittent fasting and about you as a person in general.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
It is a pleasure. So like we were just talking about, around like mid-December, I was like, oh, intermittent fasting. I can't remember if one of my friends brought it up to me or what happened. And so then I was looking it up on YouTube. I came across your awesome videos. And then this is like day 36 or something of my intermittent fasting journey. And have kept on like kind of going back to your videos for inspiration. So without further ado, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, my name's Autumn. I'm a certified clinical nutritionist with my master's nutrition human performance. I say that in every single one of my YouTube videos. So it's just gotten to the point where it's like all one sentence that I don't even know what I'm saying anymore.
Yeah.
But I created the complete intermittent fasting bundle programs, which is really especially for women. Why I created it, because I had so many clients who were using intermittent fasting because it sounds like so cool and exciting and it has so many great benefits. But just the information, especially at the time when I created it, was so like intermittent fasting is where you just like don't eat for a bit. And the longer you can fast, the better. So it's like there's just so much poor information and nothing addressed the actual food itself. So I really wanted to make sure, especially for women, that we really got into the food component as well as the actual fasting. Like, how long should you be fasting? Like, is longer really even better? Because with us as women, it's so easy for us to respond poorly to calorie restriction.
Yes.
And, we want to make sure that we avoid that, especially if you're at like childbearing age. You don't want to have any issues with fertility. So it was everything. I mean, it started off even before my YouTube channel, started off with the programs where I created for that reason. And then it's like, well, I should probably like talk about this because it's also a really complex topic and share more information about it. And then that's when the YouTube channel started. And that's been just amazing to reach so many people and help so many people with this topic.
Right. So did it come from you were like studying about this at uni or at school? And then from that, when you started delving into more information and then you wanted to spread it more. And so that's why you kind of got into YouTube?
Well, to start off with the university part, unfortunately, nutrition studies in school is so bad. I mean, regardless of what school you're going to, it's just so poor on what they're teaching you. I started off studying my bachelor's. So my first 4 years was in nutrition and dietetics. Mm-hmm. And I was going to go the RD route, which is a registered dietitian in the US. I'm not sure if it's different in the UK.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's the one that's more like through the government type of licensing. Like it's seen as an approved government type of licensing program. So I went through that basic like 4 years of studying where you learn a lot of the science, which is in my opinion, the most useful part.
Yeah.
And then the last 2 years, you go into so much of just like the dietary guidelines that the US gives, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with those at all, but they're pretty bad. And just really, old science.
I feel like maybe have come across, is that kind of like with the I don't know if this is right, but like with the FDA and how they say like fat is bad and then people go for low fat things, which is like high sugar and
right. Yeah. I mean, they've gotten a little bit better over the years. Like they finally came out in 2015 saying like, oh, it looks like cholesterol from your food doesn't actually cause heart disease. So that's been like one good thing. And they have gone down a little bit in terms of how much added sugar they'll allow. Right. Still way more than anyone should be consuming. But yeah, it's just not very great. And even with the master's programs, a lot of them still have to be reliant on like using at least some of those types of protocols somewhere in there. So for me, I mean, you don't learn about like intermittent fasting, maybe a little bit here and there. When I was in school, for undergrad, it wasn't really something that was widely talked about. Where I am very lucky is that my dad's a chiropractor. So I grew up going to a lot of these seminars with him, which was so amazing because you would learn about things that you wouldn't see in the public for like 10 years, like later. Wow. So we were learning about the benefits of intermittent fasting, lower sugar, dietary protocols, various types of superfoods that can help for various purposes. when I was like in high school,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm sure even then the research was well before that as well. But it takes so long for all this information to actually reach the public, let alone the universities.
Yeah.
Long-winded answer to your question on how I came across it, had nothing to do with school. But what I love about school is that it did teach me the basics, which I think is so important, like the biochemistry, the anatomy, the physiology, the organic chemistry. All of that tends to be underlooked, I think, when people go through their schooling, but it's so crucial to be able to make your own decisions on what's going to actually be a good protocol for people in the future.
And why do you think the government, in terms of the information that they understand and put out with to do with food, is either like 10 years delayed or sometimes just kind of wrong?
I think there's a couple reasons. First of all, it is highly political, which is something that a lot of people are aware of now, which I'm happy about. But I also think it sort of comes from good intentions, where they want to make sure that they're not rushing to decisions, where they're not changing what they're saying and going back and forth. So I understand the good intentions part, but there's also definitely so much politics that goes around it too. I think people forget that even as like scientists, people are humans. And when they marry themselves to some type of idea of what's going to work, it's really hard to divorce yourself from that idea or concept. So like this low fat protocol and like sugar isn't the devil protocol that has been going on really since, I think, the fruition of the FDA's USDA guidelines, which I believe was with the McCarthy committee back in like the 70s. I could be wrong. But it was somewhere around then. That's been going on for so long that it's hard to divorce yourself from that and be like, okay, like actually, let's completely flip flop what we were talking about. Like we don't think fat is the devil. It's actually needed for so many things, and sugar is just like the worst thing.
Yeah, it's crazy. There was this advert, I think it was last year in the UK, and I don't know for what company it was for, but it was like this picture of a family, and they had printed it and put it on like a bunch of London buses, and they had like a spread of food, and one of the items of food I think was butter. And I don't know what the UK government food regulator people are called here, but they banned the adverts because they were like, oh, we can't have, there are like, you can't have like too many there's like some weird rule in the UK is that you can't have too many dairy products or something, or like a high content of fat in an advert. So they were like, no, get rid of it, and like got rid of the adverts.
That is absolutely crazy, especially when you think about like the types of advertisements that are allowed in terms of like medications and such.
It's so true. Yeah, I know, it's mad.
Wow.
But yeah, I think there is definitely like so much of that conflicting evidence that you see out there, especially in different books from like diet eras, or especially even this concept of a diet. Like a lot of your videos, which I really enjoy and I want to talk a lot about, is how you really emphasize being like satiated versus calories. And I feel like in the past, and a lot with these government things, is like, if they want to make sure that people, aren't becoming obese or whatever and maintaining their kind of diet in some way, restricting calories will do it. You might end up like a bit crazy and anxious and hungry all the time, but I guess it's a fast-tracked way. But I would love to chat to you about kind of going back a little bit, actually. So were you saying that most of your research that you were doing was then kind of focused towards women and the videos that you were putting out on YouTube?
Yeah, definitely for women. I mean, my master's is in nutrition, human performance, so it's not female specific. It's really just looking at like how food can affect our performance, whether it be athlete or just really any performance in life in terms of like energy levels. But yeah, especially for the gap that I saw in the fields, there's a lot of guys on YouTube who are talking about nutrition, and I don't think women can resonate with that very well because it's a guy telling us what women should be feeling or experiencing. And I get a lot of questions where people are like, what do I eat to help prevent PMS cravings? A guy's not going to really know that. So yeah, it definitely was just this missing gap I saw where there's not a relatable person who's talking about these really important things.
Yeah. And so do you think there is actually a difference? Because I have heard some people say that for men, I don't know if this is a total like wives' tale, but I've heard that for men, fasting might be better because of hormones, and for women, it's more stressful. Is there any like truth in that? And are we different in terms of how effective intermittent fasting can be?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously we do have biological differences, like men are going to produce more testosterone and we're going to produce more estrogen. Like obviously there's those different types of differences. But in terms of fasting, unfortunately, a lot of that media attention around fasting being bad comes from so much either poor research or misunderstanding of the research. Yeah. So namely the biggest one where people say, oh, it shrinks your ovaries and it causes fertility issues, comes from rat studies, which, you know, we have a lot different types of physiological functions than rats, like even on how we eat, like they tend to be a little bit more grazers than us. So yeah, it's going to be different. But the studies that are actually done on women haven't shown that. So haven't shown that there's any issues, at least with these shorter term fasts. Longer term fasts, that's where I can see an issue. And I have seen, especially with alternate day fasting, which is something I don't recommend, which alternate day fasting is where you have like, where you eat very, let's call it normally, where people eat like every couple of hours during the day on one day. And then the next day you either don't eat anything for that full 24 hours, or you have like less than 500 calories during that day.
Is that obviously like, sorry, is that like 5-2?
It's like a bunch of variations when it comes to fasting, but it's similar to that in the sense where, yeah, you have every other day you're fasting. Like there's different, kind of like with time restricted feeding. So like with regular intermittent fasting, there's 16-8, 24, 12-12, 14-10. There's all these different hours that you could use it, which really, in my opinion, you're splitting hairs there for looking at those differences. But yeah, for alternate day fasting, there's various types of alternate day fasting people can do as well. But essentially the basic system of it is that you're not eating on one day and then you're eating on another. So you're really not getting any of your nutrient needs on every other day, essentially. And especially women are so sensitive to calorie restriction, not just fasting. And that's something I really want to make clear, because fasting is different than just calorie restriction. But we are so sensitive to calorie restriction and hunger that having where every other day we don't have enough food for our body and we're not able to get any food in on those days, that can really mess with our hormones. And that's where some of the, there's one specific study that was done on human women, and they did find that there's some issues with alternate day fasting. But that's a lot different than just, even a 12-hour fast every day, which really isn't that crazy. Like if you finish eating at 7 p.m., you're eating again at 7 a.m. Really not that much of a fast. Even a 16-hour fast really isn't that crazy either. That's usually roughly what I'll use. But you're not eating less, you're just eating less often. So you're eating your normal amounts of foods that you need, different than from just eating whatever you want, but your normal amounts of foods that your body needs just during a shorter amount of time. And with alternate day fasting, you're not necessarily getting that every day.
So why do you think people, because you're right, like 12 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours, it's not that long when you kind of like do it, especially a couple of times, and you get used to it really quickly. Why do you think people go then do you think people are just like trying to experiment with different things by doing like alternate day, 5-2, like all these different things, or that they want to feel like they're being pushed to the limits in some kind of way? Like, why does that even come about?
Here's the thing with alternate day fasting, there has been some studies that are done that show benefit, but it just, in my opinion, from what I've seen, isn't going to necessarily benefit women. That's the biggest biological difference there, that men might do better with that, just because we are more sensitive to that calorie restriction. But yeah, I mean, like for why people might feel the need to constantly go longer, I think that ultimately comes down to they're not seeing results because they're not addressing their food. So that's why people want to keep pushing it longer, because they're like, oh, well, especially if they're stuck in the calorie restriction mentality of weight loss, they think, well, if I just, have a longer fast, then that means I'll have less time I'm eating. And that means that I'll be able to restrict even more of my calories and lose weight faster. So not everyone, there's definitely a lot of people who want the longevity benefits, the increased autophagy, which is a whole other conversation. But, I think for a lot of people, especially if weight loss is a goal, that's the purpose behind it, is because they're thinking, well, should I fast longer to break through this plateau? Should I switch up the fast every day in order to keep my body guessing? When, in reality, a lot of the times they're just not addressing the food within their eating window. And that's what's going to make about 80 to 90% of the results anyway.
And so because I was listening to a video that you did on YouTube where you were talking about how before you got into intermittent fasting, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were like what is this, kind of skeptical about it.
Yeah.
And so before you started doing it, were you doing all those things of like eating really healthy, getting the right kinds of foods? Like, and if you were, then how did you transition into doing intermittent, and how did you find that?
Yeah, I definitely thought I was eating very well.
Okay.
I was covering a lot of really great bases, eating a lot of vegetables, not eating highly processed foods. But at the time, I definitely was not eating enough protein for my needs. And for me, that resulted in being hungry all the time. That, and I was getting a lot of breakouts too, which is something that has been found to cause some issues with the skin, is if you are protein deficient. So when I first heard about intermittent fasting, so this was, gosh, I don't even remember, probably like 10 years ago or so, at one of those seminars, I remember being like, lols, I couldn't do that. I have to eat like every I'm always eating. Like, no, like that's impossible. That was also before I had learned more about the migrating motor complex, which is something else we can talk about. So important for decreasing bloating. But yeah, I mean, if you don't address your food, then you're not going to be able to fast, because you're always going to be hungry and you're never going to hit those satiety signals, and you're going to be relying on that blood glucose spike and fall and those energy dips and crashes. And when you're in a state of hypoglycemia or low blood sugar, you can't fast. Like
Right.
you have to eat something. That's a dangerous situation. And that's why, like with my programs, I never recommend jumping straight into intermittent fasting. I always have that 7-day IF detox protocol where people can first address balancing that out, making sure they're getting really satiating foods, getting enough for their needs, and then incorporating fasting.
Okay. And so what is satiating foods? Like, what are the things that, if somebody is a beginner and they want to get involved with intermittent fasting and they don't know how to start, and maybe want to clean up their diet first to make sure they're
Yes.
getting the right nutrition, what does that look like?
The number one most important one is protein. A
Mhm.
lot of people, I think, I know I did. I just assumed I was eating plenty of protein. I'd never really thought about it, just because, I think especially with a lot of plant-based focus, which I was plant-based at the time, it's easy to just discount how much protein you really should be getting in. And there's definitely ways to go about it on a plant-based diet, but you have to just be really particular and make sure that you are. Protein, number one key important satiety macronutrient. It's the one that causes your body to secrete the satiety hormone peptide YY. So we really need to make sure that you're getting enough protein in. Plus, just for overall maintenance of the body. If you're exercising, I mean, if you're living, you need to have protein in every day. You're using it for your bones, for your hormones, for literally everything within your body. Like I mentioned, your skin, hair. So it's so important to be getting in enough protein every day. But paired alongside that is the fat component, because fat is more strongly going to cause the satiety hormone cholecystokinin, or CCK, to be released. So we need to make sure you're getting both of those. Otherwise, you might not feel full and satiated for the extended amount of time necessary to have that fast. So that's a common mistake I'll see as well, where people will just focus on the protein or just focus on the fat. Like, let's say if it's a keto approach, they'll be like, oh, just focus on this fat component to keep me full. That, if you just address one or the other, not both, you're not really getting the full activation of those satiety hormones. And so you're not going to be able to have that extended amount of time where you're able to go without eating something.
Right. And I noticed you didn't mention carbs.
Right. Carbs are not satiating.
Okay.
In the sense of satiety hormones. You might feel good. Like there's separate purposes for why you might incorporate various carbohydrates. Fiber is one that can help with satiety. So fiber is within a lot of carbohydrates, not all. So you think like vegetables is one, but fiber is also in a lot of fat containing products like chia seeds or avocados. So fiber acts on the stretch mechanism within the stomach. So it physically stretches out the stomach, which sounds like a bad thing, but actually it's good. It sends that stretching, sends a signal up to your brain and tells your brain that you're full and satisfied and you don't need to eat. But a common problem that can happen is if like you're like what I mentioned for myself, where I was eating a ton of vegetables previously, but I was so hungry all the time.
Right.
If you're prematurely stretching out that stomach and telling your brain you're full and satisfied, but you're not getting enough protein and fat before you tell your brain that you're full and satisfied, then you're going to be full for about 30 minutes once the fiber passes through to your stomach. then you didn't get the satiety hormones activated, and you're going to be hungry again.
Mm-hmm.
So each of those are important, but especially for incorporating fasting, it's so important to first be looking at the protein, then the fat, then the fiber.
Okay. And so if somebody then cleans up their diet a little bit, or whatever that means to you, incorporating more protein, making sure you're getting a good level of fat, getting enough fiber in, and then they want to start doing it, what would you recommend for a beginner in terms of like an hour, like hours of window?
Like what's a good fasting period to start off with?
Exactly.
Yeah. I always recommend starting off with less, because you can always increase like how long you're going to be fasting, but it can just be kind of a shock on the system and turn you off from the whole idea of it if you jump straight into like a 16-hour fast. I fully remember the first few times that I had used intermittent fasting. Granted, I made those mistakes I was talking about, so I was doing it the very hard way. And I remember like looking at the clock and being like, okay, I have 32 more minutes left. I guess I'll drink some more water. Like just freaking out.
Got my water here.
Yeah. Exactly. But yeah, now I'm perfectly fine. I could go a lot longer, but I make sure to break my fast at a certain time to get enough nutrients in. But yeah, starting off with a 12-hour fast is a really great place to start off. Mm-hmm. So you're basically just not snacking after dinner. And that in itself is a really great tool to be incorporating to improve sleep and bloating. So if you, going back to example, if you're to eat dinner at, like if you're an early bird special like me, and you're eating dinner at like 5:30 every day and you're done by 6, then you theoretically could eat again at 6 a.m. the next day.
Yeah.
As long as you're not eating anything after. And that would be a 12-hour fast. That in itself is still probably miles above what most people are doing anyway. Most people are used to having like, oh, I'll have a dessert after dinner. And I actually feel like I need a little bit something before I go to bed because I'm feeling a little bit hungry, and then eat something right when they wake up. So you're actually cutting out a lot of that digestion time by just simply cutting it off after you finish dinner and then, eating again the next morning.
Yeah. The worst is I don't do it now, but like I remember once I got into such a pattern of like and it's so funny. It's even the same as waking up in the middle of the night to check your phone, like getting into a pattern one night of waking up at 3 a.m., having like a bowl of cereal and then going back to bed. And then you like wake up because your body is used to it. And it's like, oh, right. I think we eat at 3 a.m. now, and you're like, I'm not hungry, like stop.
Yeah. That, and especially if you're craving something like cereal, which is going to be really quickly digestible and easily absorbed and really bring the blood glucose level up. You probably had some issues with hypoglycemia, and you're probably getting hypoglycemic in the middle of the night. And that's why you're probably craving something in the middle of the night.
Right. Okay. Hypoglycemic, what does that mean?
It just means like low blood sugar.
Okay. Does that mean like I'd be craving actual sugar?
Right. Because when you're in that state of like, to go over the vast generalization of this, with our blood sugar levels, our body wants to keep a very stable level for this. We don't want very high because that can actually cause a lot of damage to our cells. It can actually prematurely age our cells. Okay. But we also don't want very low because then that can cause our brain to go into essentially shock. And if it's low enough, we could die. Right. So we do need to have very stable levels, which is why you don't want to rely on that as an energy source, because then you're constantly going up and down. Mm-hmm. That's where using more fat as fuel is more efficient for long term, because then you're not just purely relying on riding those ups and downs, and you can go a little bit longer without eating. But the state of hypoglycemia can really happen, and often happens when people are used to eating frequently and eating a higher carbohydrate diet, which seems kind of like counterintuitive. It seems like, how could that cause low blood sugar levels? Yeah. The reason why is because you're causing if you eat like, let's say a big bowl of pasta, you get this really big immediate spike in your blood glucose levels, which sends these warning signals to your body that, okay, we need to quickly bring this back down. Mm-hmm. So you quickly release a lot of the storing hormone insulin, and that brings it back down. But the more rapidly it increases, the more rapidly it'll decrease too. And that's where this overcompensation can occur, where it decreases your blood glucose levels and causes you to be in that state of low blood sugar. And that's where you need something really immediate, because you can't be in that low blood sugar state either. So it's like, it's hard to break that habit initially, because you can see where both are kind of like these warning signal times. Yeah. But that's where slowly incorporating the more protein and fats so that you do get satiated and you're not as reliant on those carbohydrates is so important.
And does that mimic kind of your energy levels and spikes as well? Like when it, after you have a big bowl of pasta, you're kind of like, yeah, I'm buzzing. Or like while you're eating, you're like, woo. And then you're just like, oh my God, I need a nap.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Because you don't have that quick energy available anymore. So you just kind of shut down. But in the beginning, you have all of this excess energy that your body wants to use and burn off. So it's increasing insulin at the same time, but it also might be telling your body, okay, we need to quickly use this up. So let's increase heart rate. Let's increase just activity level to get us to burn this up quickly.
Right. Yeah, I do have to say one of the best things that I've noticed about doing intermittent fasting so far is that normally, like before I did it, around after 2, 3, I would always be like, I need to lie down for like an hour. It was really, and not
Yeah.
nap, but like I need to lie down. I couldn't fall asleep.
Right.
And now my energy really is pretty much like good throughout the day
Yeah.
until I have to go to bed, which has been like such a help.
Yeah. One thing that intermittent fasting more recently has been studied to do is kind of reset our circadian rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
So, our circadian rhythm of like wake and sleep time.
Mm-hmm.
So, it helps to basically get us back to like it's daylight, we're awake, and we need to be energized, and it's sleep time. So, we need to increase melatonin and go to bed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And so how did you go from, oh my God, I need to snack every 2 hours, I can't do this? Like, why did you want to do intermittent fasting, and what are the main health benefits about doing that?
I personally wanted to do it mostly because I was experiencing at the time a lot of bloating, likely because I was eating very frequently and likely because I was purely just eating so much fiber and nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
But intermittent fasting has the kind of like side effect of naturally triggering a very natural process within our GI tract where it cleans out our gut bacteria and left behind food bacteria that usually leads to bloating.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where I was talking about the migrating motor complex. This is something that should be happening on a daily basis. It's not something that's abnormal, but it is something just like sleep that we need to be having on a daily basis. But it's only turned on when you're not eating. So it is slightly turned on when you're sleeping, but it's a lot slower. Just a lot of GI activities are slower when you're sleeping. So that's why having a fasted period when you're awake is really important for the gut cleaning portion, because it activates this gut cleaning process called the migrating motor complex, which basically starts in your stomach and does all these contractions starting from your stomach through your small intestine, including your gallbladder and down through your colon, and flushes out the bacteria, the left-behind bacteria in your small intestine, which we really don't want that much in there,
Mm-hmm.
And the food that's left behind as well. Because if those are left behind, it can cause fermentation, and that's what can cause bloating. So for me, that was the main reason why I wanted to use it. At the time, I actually didn't know about migrating motor complex. I just had heard that can help. The fasting period can help with decreasing bloating. And then once I experienced such crazy, like just amazing benefits, like I never get bloated anymore. I used to have to lay on my stomach after every meal. It was awful, very painful bloating. But after I learned about it, I was like, okay, well, now I need to understand like why this is happening. And this is a not very well-known process. Like I wasn't taught it in school. I had to go actively seek it out. And that was even after getting my master's in nutrition. But yeah, it's this really awesome process that is so underutilized. If people are snacking all the time, they're never activating it, which is where bloating can be such an issue.
So then would you say the main benefits to fasting would be cleaning out your gut, and if that's the right kind of term to
Mm-hmm.
use, which will help a lot of people with bloating, and then also I guess what you mentioned before about how fasting can help your circadian rhythm and like give you more melatonin before you go to sleep.
Yeah, also what it's specifically been studied for in terms of weight loss.
Mm-hmm.
So for weight loss, which is one thing that a lot of people see great benefits with for intermittent fasting when done properly, like what I was talking about, is that intermittent fasting does help your body better use fat as fuel. So we really have two fuel sources that we can use. Mm-hmm. One is fat and one is a variation of carbohydrates or glucose. Mm-hmm. So the simple form of carbohydrates. And what intermittent fasting does is it makes it so we get better at using fat as fuel rather than just relying on that glucose or carbohydrates as a fuel source. Mm-hmm. So something else that it does in terms of weight loss is, since we are naturally fasted, I mean, when you're fasted, you're not eating, obviously. Mm-hmm. So you're not going to be stimulating the fat storing hormone anyway of insulin, which means you have a longer amount of time that your body is able to utilize fat as fuel. So that's where the weight loss component, it can better help burn fat as fuel, and it can have a longer amount of time where you're not actively stimulating the storing hormone anyway.
Okay, so because you'd be burning more, because it would be using more of the energy source from fat, you're literally burning the fat that you already have stored rather than just burning energy from whatever food that you're just eating.
Right, right.
Okay, interesting. And what is that? Because people say there are lots of different types of you can't drink this, or you can have this, or this breaks a fast and this doesn't.
Mhm.
What does fasting look like? What kind of things can you eat or drink if you can?
Yeah, so there's really two different types of fasting. One is a true fast, one is more fasting mimicking. So a true fast is where you literally at most are having water. There's some debate on if you could have like just unsweetened coffee or tea. But like real purists will tell you you can only have water. There's even dry fasting, and that's talked a lot about within like the doctor chiropractor realm as a therapeutic type of fasting. Not something that I think should most people should be done because you're not having water either. But there
Whoa.
are therapeutic purposes why you would do that. But again, weight loss is not one I would recommend it for because that's going to be getting extreme at that point and it's not under doctor supervision.
Mhm.
So yeah, if you're looking at a true fast, you're really just having water, maybe unsweetened tea or coffee.
Mhm.
And that's not going to cause any break in the migrating motor complex, at least if you're only sticking to water, which helps with more of the activation of the gut cleaning process. And then if you're looking, well, of course, you also have the decreased insulin response and you'll still get the fat burning benefits with the true fast as well.
Mhm.
Like, let's say if you're brand new to intermittent fasting and if, hunger is an issue, even in the beginning while you're using it, you could use more of the fasting mimicking and still get those same benefits of the lowered insulin or lowered fat storing hormone. And that's where you use some things during that fasting period to trigger satiety, but that won't cause insulin to go up. So the only macronutrient that does that, where you can keep insulin low but trigger satiety, is fat.
Mhm.
Protein does trigger insulin to go up. So we don't want to be using that during a fasting state. This is where you could use, like, if you have coffee, like heavy whipping cream to an extent in there, or half and half, or make keto coffee.
Mhm.
Those are, like MCT oil and coconut oil and grass-fed butter, all of that within your coffee to help trigger the satiety and just make it easier to transition into using intermittent fasting. So that's really great. That fasting mimicking, where it mimics a fast, but it's not necessarily a true fast. That's really great for beginners, especially if you're getting used to that transition state.
And is that because some people say whatever time that you start, you eat your meal, you eat till you're full, essentially, and then can you snack in between? Is it better to like totally not snack in between, like within that fasting, within your eating window, like before you have your next meal? Is it better to just be like, okay, one meal, or is snacking fine? Or what would
Mm-hmm.
be like your kind of best like advice on that?
I mean, ideally, what we want to do is not snack because that's a big sign that you just didn't eat until satiated. So, especially if you consider how, with the fasting period, even if you're using like a 14-hour fast, you're only having a 10-hour eating window.
Mhm.
So, if you're having a 3 meal structure, then you shouldn't even really have time to start feeling hungry again in between meals. And if you do, that's a huge sign that you didn't get enough of protein or fat, or that you overconsumed on sugar or starches, because those can typically cause more cravings as well.
Mhm.
So I like to view snacking as a sign of what you need to change from your previous meal. So
Mhm.
it's a good tool if you do feel like you really need to snack in between meals, especially with that shorter eating window. It's a good tool to help you reassess your meals in the future and see, like, okay, do I need to increase my protein? Do I need to increase my fat? Did I have a little bit too much sugar? Or, oh, I guess I had sweet potato fries at that first meal and I ate a lot of them. So that could have caused me to have cravings too. So I like to view snacking more as a tool rather of a tool to understand what you need to add or replace with your meals.
Right. That's such a like positive, good way to look at it. Like next time I like, snack loads and be like, this is an interesting opportunity for me to
Yeah,
analyze
you're
my
just
last
a
meal.
scientist in your own life.
Exactly. But then what about people who, because like I've been doing intermittent fasting now for like 30 something days, like I mentioned, and some days I'm really great in terms of, I have one meal, I don't snack, and then I have another. And then there are some days where even though I feel like I ate a satiated and like nutritious meal, maybe it's just my emotions. Like, what about with like emotional eating? Do you think you've got to get into kind of a habit of, and then at a certain point you break the snacking habit once you do it so repetitively? But what advice do you have for anybody who they go through like emotional eating, or like it's Saturday night and they're like, I'm just gonna, have a bowl of ice cream or something like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Well, a couple things. First of all, one of the best tools to guard against even any type of cravings is going to be the satiety, and making sure that you are eating until fully satiated, and hitting all those markers, because that can help prevent those sugar cravings later on. It's even been studied as something that with various study participants, it really helps reduce sugar cravings. So if you've assessed that, and now it's more of the emotional aspect, which absolutely sugar, carbohydrates have that comfort, at least a temporary comfort feeling effect, which in those circumstances, some of the best tools is to figure out better approaches to reducing what is causing that stress in the first place. So something that I always talk with my clients about, if able to, of course, weather permitting, one of the best tools to do is actually to go outside, specifically outside, and go for a 10 or 15-minute walk, especially if you live by a park, a beach, an ocean, a lake, some type of outdoor experience where you can get exposed to negative ions, which has been found to significantly reduce our serum cortisol, or stress hormone levels. And that in itself can actually really help to reduce the cravings that were caused by the stress in the first place.
Right.
Which there are other factors as well, like improving sleep quality, because that can actually really increase the stress levels the next day and cause increased sugar cravings. And then like various types of supplements that can be used if you suffer more from something like anxiety, where, the stress is more consistent.
Yeah.
So there's tons of different tools, but it all comes down to first assessing, is it because it's physiological, I didn't eat enough of the right types of things, or is it stress? And in that circumstance, is it stress caused from true stress, or is it stress caused from poor sleep? What do I need to be addressing?
And so do you think, because a lot of your videos, I think, are really like well-rounded, because you don't just talk about this, like obviously food is a massive part of it and the nutrition that you're getting, and then of course intermittent fasting, but then you talk a lot about how sleep is really important, and how managing your cortisol levels is really important, and anxiety, and not going on your phone like an hour before bed. Do you think all those things are like play the same amount, are kind of have the same weight in trying to live a healthy lifestyle? Or do you think one is more important than the other, whether it's vitamin D or that kind of supplements? Or
Well, they all sort of feed into each other. So that's where you don't want to just focus on one thing, maybe one at a time. It can be a little overwhelming to be like, I'm going to fix every single part of my life. Like I didn't even do that. As I mentioned, I totally screwed up when I first used intermittent fasting, and that was a whole path in itself. But yeah, I mean, focusing on one piece at a time, but also knowing that each one has such a big impact on the other. Like our stress levels can be greatly affected by what we're eating. If we're having a higher sugar diet, and if you actually have a low protein diet as well, that can actually trigger more feelings of anxiety and stress. So remember those spikes and falls in blood glucose levels. When we have those low blood glucose levels, it can actually trigger the same feelings as anxiety or panic attack. So that's where these can all feed into each other. Same thing with sleep. If you're not getting good enough sleep, so if you are sacrificing your sleep in order to every morning get up at 4 a.m. to go work out, you're actually working against your goals, probably because you're not even getting the recovery from that workout. So you're going to have increased stress levels the next day. You're also going to have increased ghrelin, which is our hunger hormone, and increased sugar cravings, which makes it really impossible to deal with the food itself and make those good choices that will then make you feel better. So all of those really feed into each other. It's just about taking it piece by piece, figure out what for you is the most, what's the most primary thing that's causing issues in your wellness goals. And is it food? Like, have you addressed your sleep and your sleep is great, but your stress and your food are an issue, but your food, is way out of whack, then address that first. Or if you're getting 3, like my future mother-in-law, she knows this, she gets about 4.5 hours of sleep at most a night. It's probably more like 2 hours of sleep, just because she's like such a hardworking person working all the time. That for her, I mean, the food can help, but if she doesn't address her sleep first, then it's not really going to do much. So it's figuring out what's most primary importance for you as an individual, addressing that first, but then knowing that's not the first step. You need to make sure you get all of those components.
I think that is such an important thing to mention that this is all like a journey of something that you will, it's like changing your lifestyle. Like one of the reasons why I really like intermittent fasting is it's not like a diet, which I think,
Mm-hmm.
diets are shit because you like try this one thing out and it's like a crash course and you do it for a really short period of time. Whereas like with intermittent fasting, it's really, and with all those things you're talking about, like it's a journey of figuring out how can you lead a better and healthier lifestyle in a way that works best for you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's there's no one component of life that's greater than the other. It's like if you look at each portion of your body, like if you didn't have your heart, it wouldn't matter if your brain was great. You don't
Yeah.
have your heart to pump blood up to your brain,
Yeah.
or vice versa. So you need to make sure that all these components are in check, but taking it piece by piece and addressing what's most important first. Like what needs the most addressing first.
Right. And so when you started it and you had like a bit of a it sounds like what you just said, that you had to discover like a bunch of different things if you were doing it totally wrong in the beginning.
Yep.
When did you feel like you got to a point where it kind of clicked and did you have that moment where you're like, oh, this is great, this is how I want to live my life?
Yeah, that's actually a question I get a lot too, because it kind of stems from the idea of like, how long can you use intermittent fasting, and should you be using intermittent fasting forever? From what I've seen with my clients, myself, and just overall the human physiology on what makes sense, some amount of a fasting period is just like sleep. Like we have this, if you think of like sleep versus being awake, we have this like repair time, and then we have this time when we're building up. We can't have that repair time unless we have the build up time when we're awake, where we're challenging our body and so on. But then you also need that recovery time to actually recover from that building. Just like with a workout, you can't constantly work out and expect to see results. You need to have that rest and repair. So for our GI health and for overall health, it makes sense to always have some level of fasting, whether it be that, purely if you're focusing on the migrating motor complex and having 4-hour gaps in between each of your meals, that in itself is great and you're going to accomplish that. Or if it's having a daily 12 to 16-hour fast, you need to have some type of break from eating. Otherwise, you're just always challenging your GI tract and you're never allowing it to have that rest and cleanup time. It's always in this building time, but it's never in that cleaning time. So yeah, to answer your question, that was kind of, again, a long-winded, more general question, but for myself, it just started to make sense once I saw how it fit in with the anatomy and physiology that I already knew on how you would need some level of this all the time, but how it would look for each person could be different. Could be a 12-hour, 16-hour, could be no fasting, but having the 4-hour gaps between each of your meals, but you do need some amount of gut rest every day.
And apart from the gut, why is it good to give your digestive system a break?
You mean in terms of like the various health benefits?
Yeah, like the like, because I heard one thing and I'm just wondering if this is true at all. I read that this might not be true at all, but I read that when you eat, more blood goes to your digestive system, and so there's less of it. Like that's why people apparently, if they're in a fasted state for a long time, they can like think more clearly and things.
Yeah.
Is that true? Is that like a good reason to give your digestive system a break, or is that complete
Yeah, I
bullshit?
mean, mental clarity is definitely something people experience. And if you think about it, that also really can make sense because when you're constantly focused on, I'm hungry, I need to eat, like if you're always feeling either I need to eat something or you're in the active state of eating, you don't really have much mental space for anything else.
Yeah.
So if you have this period of time where you're not, think of how much brain space would take up when you are just focused on I need to eat something.
Yeah.
So always going to come to the forefront of your mind. It's never just going to be like trickling in the back, like you can kind of forget about it. It's going to be right up in front, telling you like I need to eat something right now. So yeah, if you have that gap and you're able to stabilize your blood glucose levels and you have that stable energy, you have so much more brain space to actually focus on anything else.
Yeah. It's funny. I think there are some people who are just different, like some people, I think I have like a really good relationship with food, but I am a foodie in the sense that I love eating. I love like different types of food. Like I think about food a lot of the time, you know, like,
Yeah.
and I think that with intermittent fasting, it's been super helpful for someone like me. Because if I, like you just said, if you have a period of time where you're like, okay, well, I'm not eating right now, so I'm just not going to think about it. It can be something as simple as that, but then it just does give me more attention. I think sometimes you just need to be told no, like especially if you're not in a state when you're not hungry. And so I just spend less of my time thinking about food and actually about like a different task in front of me,
Yeah.
which has been really helpful.
Yeah. And again, going back to the idea of the unstable blood glucose levels, like I mentioned, in those states, it's not like something we can't ignore. It almost is like an emergency situation. So if you have like, if your car's on fire, you're not going to be worried about like an oil change.
Yeah.
Like you need to be worried about like the fact that your car's on fire and that you need to eat. So it's not even like with intermittent fasting, it gives you permission to not think about it.
Yeah.
It's more so that you are able to physiologically not have your car on fire.
Right.
And now you can focus on that oil change.
Right. That makes sense. Because is that because you're literally not in a state where you feel physiologically uncomfortable, or you're not massively hungry because your blood glucose levels, I don't know if this is right, but like are stable?
No, you're doing great.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much exactly it. So we've been, especially if someone is used to that idea of a higher carbohydrate diet, if they're used to having sugar containing drinks, if they're used to eating frequently, then the idea of like not being focused about food or not having to eat every couple of hours can seem so foreign that doesn't seem like it could be possible. Yeah. Where it seems like it should just be, oh, okay, I just won't think about food for a bit. Like sort of like what you're saying, permission to just not think about it. But in reality, we're actually addressing those physiological factors that cause you to need to think about food. Right. So that's where addressing the food itself. So this isn't just about intermittent fasting. It's also about the types of foods that you are eating during that eating window. Because if you were just eating, like, let's say a pumpkin spice latte that has 50 grams of sugar in 1 grande, and like, a scone along with it, like your blood glucose levels are going to be going on a wild ride. Yeah. So you will not even be able to not think about food because you haven't addressed that underlying physiological need for satiety and stabilizing blood glucose levels.
Yeah. And going back to the pumpkin spice latte, because you, I know that you're a big proponent of treat meals, right? Mm-hmm. Or not cheat days, not cheat meals, but treat. Yep. Yeah. Right. Which I have now started by the way, using that language, because I'm like, it's not a cheat, it's a treat. Right. Yeah. And so what have you got to say about people who they do just, want a treat meal every now and then, or they do want, a pumpkin spice latte, or do you think there is space for people to have that? Or do you think maybe it's just sugar, it shouldn't be in your body anyway? Or what are your thoughts on that kind of thing?
Yeah, I definitely am a big believer in treats, like having a treat meal structure. There's actually been studies, you might have seen this video, but my treat meal video, where I talk about a study where they actually allowed for like one scheduled, and that's what's really important. It's actually scheduled. It's not just in the moment, like, oh, I want to have some Oreos, but like, scheduled treat where you plan on having that. And they had that for participants for 1 day of the week, and then participants who didn't have any treat, and they actually lost the same amount of weight. And the treat meal proponents, the study group actually had a longer time that they were able to stick with it as well. And it's because you are able to fill that more emotional need. You're able to feel as if you're participating in important celebratory occasions, like a birthday, and having a slice of cake and not feeling like I can't participate in that. Mm-hmm. Or, like your family has a pizza night and you all make homemade pizza together. Like, that's awesome. You should be able to still participate in that. But it is about switching your perspective on what is going to be considered sustainable for your goals and how you feel all the time, versus the types of foods that are really just going to make you feel good in that moment, have that emotional need fulfilled, but not something that you should be having on a daily basis. Yeah. And that's where scheduling it is so important, and making sure that I usually recommend trying to keep it to dinner, so that you aren't having, the wild blood glucose ride starting off in the beginning of the day, then it's going to turn into a treat day. Yeah. And so we definitely want to avoid that, and still maintaining the normal meals of the protein, fat, and fiber leading up to that point. So you aren't going into it starved and needing to eat 3 pizzas in one sitting. So, it is about, and I hate this word balance because I think it can be so overly used to describe anything. But it is about a good balance of making sure that you still have the vast majority of the time the food that will support your goals and make you actually feel good, support your body, support your immune system, support every aspect of your body, but then also have that one time a week, which is really what it's meant for, is a treat where you can enjoy that time spent with family, enjoy, a wedding and going and having the foods that you wouldn't normally have, having like, whatever it might be that fulfills you. That's totally fine. For me, it's pasta. I really like pasta. I studied abroad in Italy. Pasta is amazing, but I also know that if I have pasta on the daily, I'm going to feel awful. My anxiety levels are going to go through the roof. I'm going to have breakouts, and that's not worth it for me. I want to feel good all the time, but I also want to allow for those times where, okay, I might not be eating something supportive of my goals, but this fulfills a different part of my life.
Yeah, I think there is also something to say for treats are awesome. Pasta is amazing, especially if you're getting like fresh organic pasta. I feel like that is different than if you're eating like, a pack of Oreos or like a Kinder Bueno or a cream egg. But those, it's funny because there's kind of on social media, like some culture of people being like, oh, treat yourself. Like, it doesn't matter. You can eat that on a daily basis. But there is like something to say of just like, but sugar can also be like super addicting, like more addicting than cocaine. And there has to be a level where it's like, enjoy it. It's a treat, like take part with your family, like 1,000%. You should, if you want to have a cream egg every now and then, do it. But I think that you just have to be aware that it can really quickly develop into an addiction or a habit. And even it goes to show when you try and quit it cold turkey, you can end up like binging on sugar, and which can obviously be like a big spiral downwards, which is not great.
Yeah. And I think what's important to understand is that we don't have a safe upper limit. Like, we don't know how much is too much sugar for anyone. Like, the amount of sugar that could be okay for someone could make someone else get diabetes. Like, it is so variable, and we have no idea what that is, even for a broad general number. The way that we know, like, okay, arsenic, you definitely can only have this much arsenic per day. We don't know about like sugar for some, at some doses could be fine for some people, and other people it could cause a lot of health issues. So that goes even back to like carbohydrate sensitivity, how sensitive someone is to carbohydrates, and its variants like sugar. And if you are more sensitive, then even those treats, it might not be a good idea to be having it be super dense in sugar, like the Oreo, where I think they even did a study and found that it truly was more addictive than cocaine, like what you said. But yeah, like viewing these treat meals as something that, fulfills that emotional need, but also you have to think of your long-term goals as well and how you want to feel all the time. And I had someone today on Instagram. It was so cute. I loved it. But she was talking about how, like, when she first saw some of my meals, she was like, these ingredients look awful. They look terrible. I could not eat any of this. And she's like, but then I decided to actually try it. I was like, wow, wait, that's actually really good. It actually tastes better than a lot of the like junk I was eating before. Why would I even choose the junk food? Like, this tastes great and I feel great. So, I know it's like such a cliche to say like good for you food can taste so good, but is 100% true. It tends to have more flavor anyway. The types of foods that, can be really addictive. If you sit and really try and think about it when you're eating it, it usually doesn't have a ton of flavor in itself. It's more of just like the feeling it gives you, like that addictive quality. But the actual flavor itself isn't necessarily like the best. So yeah, it's all relative there, and making sure that you at least give your body a chance to enjoy the foods that'll make you feel good.
Yeah, that's really true. I don't think I've ever actually sat down and like with a McDonald's or whatever and like really thought about, the flavor. Like, it's normally just in like some emotional hungover state where I'm like, give me all the food. Whereas like when you make a really good meal and you sit down and you're like, this is really great. Like, I feel really good about myself.
Right, exactly. And I just thought that was so awesome that you pointed that out, because it's so true. Like, and those foods are just they're just so not beneficial in the first place. They can lead to so many issues, and unfortunately just those foods have become so commonplace that we assume that they shouldn't be that bad for us because so many people are eating them. But then on the flip side, we also know that the vast majority, at least of Americans, are super sick, like have obesity, diabetes, heart disease. So obviously we're doing something that's causing a lot of these long-term health risks. And maybe we should take a look at the fact that some of these foods that aren't supportive of our goals are, even though they're common, it doesn't mean that they're good for us.
Yeah, it's crazy. You mentioned how sometimes you don't know the limit of when too much sugar is too much sugar. And I actually know a boy who, he didn't know that he had diabetes. And he had a sleepover when he was like a teenager. They ate so much sugar. And then he ended up I can't remember the word he used to describe it, but basically discovering that he then had diabetes because he reacted so badly to the sugar, had to go to hospital, and then they found out.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Do you happen to know if it's type 1 or type 2 diabetes?
I think it's type 2 when I actually don't know.
Type 2 is what you usually develop, where type 1 is you're usually born with it to some extent.
I believe it was type 1 then.
Okay. Yeah.
But I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, type 1 definitely. I'm surprised. How old was he when he?
Quite young. I think he was 14 or something. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's it used to be called early onset, or not early onset, but it's just type 1. So type 1 meaning it was the original form of diabetes that we knew about, and it's just where you didn't actually produce insulin, and that's a separate problem from type 2. Which type 2 is where we overproduce because we eat so much of the foods that cause the higher glucose and cause insulin to constantly be secreted.
Oh, okay. So he would have had this anyway, regardless of whether he had the massive sugar.
If it's type 1, then he would have already had that.
Okay, fair.
But yeah, I mean, to your point too, a lot of people don't realize that they're pre-diabetic or even have diabetes. There's a lot of people who, I forget the specific number. I'm totally going to butcher it and probably say something way bigger or way smaller, but the number 75 million is stuck in my head for Americans.
We're going
I'm
with
not
that.
sure if that's right. We'll just go with it.
Yeah, 75 million.
Someone's going to fact check me on that. But something like that, where it's are either diagnosed or don't know that they have diabetes or pre-diabetes. Again, that could be way bigger, way smaller. I'm not sure on that one, but it is.
We can look it up.
Yeah, actually, we have the internet.
So how many people in the US
have diabetes
and don't know?
Yes. You can even say and have diabetes and it should pop up.
Okay, so have diabetes. Let's see how many people in the US have diabetes. Apparently 34.2 million Americans, just over 1 in 10 have diabetes. 88 million American adults, approximately 1 in 3 have pre-diabetes.
Yeah, so actually more than what I was thinking.
But very close, kind of.
Yeah, ish. Just off by 25 million or something. Yeah, I don't even remember how we got to that topic, but it is something that is such a big health concern. And going back to sugar and its impact on the body, we just need to be wary of the fact that there are so many people who are getting these type of long-term health issues from something that could be entirely preventable.
Yeah. And one thing I would love to talk to you on, because lots of people, and basically what kinds of people, if any, shouldn't experiment with intermittent fasting. And then a lot of people were messaging me talking about eating disorders and intermittent fasting. And so I just wanted to get your perspective on that and your thoughts on those two things.
Yeah. Any form, like I mentioned with intermittent fasting, it can absolutely be used as a form of calorie restriction, which is why I always recommend taking a look at your eating window first and what you're actually eating. And I don't think it comes down to the fact that intermittent fasting can be a problem. I think it comes down to how you're using it. So regardless, if you suffer from an eating disorder, any type of calorie restriction isn't a good idea because you're not focused on the types of foods that will make you feel good. You're focused on just restricting from any means necessary. And if you're using intermittent fasting as one of the tools, then yeah, definitely that's not going to serve you or your goals long term. But intermittent fasting necessarily causing an eating disorder, there's been no studies that I've seen on that. In fact, there's actually a study I saw where they specifically, I'll have to look it up and send it to you, but I was just reading this one the other day, where they specifically tested that theory to see if intermittent fasting could cause an eating disorder. and it came out as it's not going to trigger an eating disorder necessarily, but if it's used for, the disordered eating, then that could be a problem. It's more so how it's used. Just like anything can be used in a way where it gets distorted into an unhealthy approach. So like, even if you were, let's give vegan as an example. Vegan, you can use that in a way to support your wellness goals. But if you're using it to only eat lettuce all day, where you're not going to eat enough for your needs, like, that's going to be a problem too. Like anything that's going to, any way that you use something to restrict yourself is a problem.
Yeah. And one personal question that I have is, this is me totally taking advantage of this just to find out, if this is okay or not. So for the last like 2 years, I have eaten popcorn for like at least 2 bowls of popcorn pretty much every night before, like as my like dinner, because I eat like a proper good meal in the day with like full of fats and carbs, well, not so much carbs, but mostly fats and protein. And then I'll have like fruit, dark chocolate, Brazil nuts, that kind of stuff. And then I just love popcorn. And I was just wondering if you think that, and I post about it on Instagram, and I don't want to be promoting something that's maybe not that healthy. And I love it. Like I literally look forward to popcorn every day and have not been tired of it since. It's air popped. I use olive oil, balsamic salt. Is that terrible for me?
There's a couple layers to this question. So it depends on your goals. So if your goal is weight loss, it's not something I'd recommend, because it is highly starchy. It's low satiety. So it's all of the opposite of what we're looking for if weight loss is a goal. Because with weight loss, we want high satiety, and we want to make sure that it's not going to cause a huge secretion of insulin. And it's so easy, as you probably noticed, is you said 2 bowls, no satiety there. Like anyone could easily, I've talked about this. I could sit and eat like 20 cups of popcorn, most likely. I don't even think that's an exaggeration. I'd have to measure that out. But you could eat so much of that and never feel full. So it's definitely not going to be great for, especially a weight loss goal, but also for gut healing. So if gut healing is a concern too, or bloating is a concern, I tend to find that, the popcorn specifically can cause some issues with that. There's a couple of theories I personally have on that, where it's definitely not proven. It's just my own theories. One being is that it does promote snacking behavior because it is low satiety. So you're not activating the migrating motor complex. But also there's some theories around that it could get a little bit more stuck in the GI tract and get fermented more easily because of that, and cause the bloating too. But a third reason is that corn is one of the most GMO'd products, and the most heavily sprayed products outside of soy. And that in itself has been found to cause some GI issues as well. So if you're getting like organic, non-GMO, if you're not using it to snack and it's like a treat every now and then, like that's fine. I love popcorn too. My fiance makes like the best popcorn, and
it's not better than mine. It's not better than mine.
I don't know. We'll have to have we'll have a popcorn cook-off one day.
Do it. Okay, done.
But yeah, like if weight loss isn't your goal, if gut healing is an issue, if you're using the highest quality popcorn, and if you're using it as a treat, I wouldn't recommend it on the daily, because it is just so high in starches. It's so low in satiety. It's just not going to be something overall to help with any wellness goal. We do need to make sure that regardless of if you have gut issues or not, that the migrated motor complex is stimulated. And that can sometimes be an issue because it does promote the snacking. But on an occasion, perfectly fine. But used consistently, I tend to shy away from that, just because it's not something I can see as a benefit.
Yeah, especially because corn has like, I don't think it has like any really nutritional, any value, except it's kind of fiber.
There's a little bit, but again, the protein and fat, like what we're going back to, there's really none of that. And that's what's going to cause more of the satiety, where the fiber might cause that short term, like that 30-minute satiety, assuming you even get some amount of fiber from that, but it's not going to make you long term feel very full.
Yes. Okay, great. I'm going to change my whole dinner routine now.
And that's, I mean, it is important to have those treats, like I mentioned, but it's just about treating them as what it is that they're meant to be treated for. Like it's eating a giant bowl of popcorn. I don't know. Did you ever watch the show Scandal?
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay, never mind. That was like her thing. She ate a bowl of popcorn every night for dinner.
Oh, no way. That's me every night.
Yeah, exactly. So if you treat it as the treat it's meant to be, rather than, I mean, you wouldn't sit and eat 10 things of corn on the cob.
No.
Like, that's essentially what it is.
Yeah.
And that's not going to make you feel very full or satisfied. It's not going to provide the protein or fat needed within the body to make you feel good.
Yeah.
So to rely on that as a food source isn't probably a very good idea, but it's also, dependent on your goals too. So especially for my clients who are very focused on weight loss, who have had difficulties in the past losing weight, it's not something that will be supportive whatsoever.
Okay. And do you have any advice, apart from the information that you gave, of if somebody is a beginner and they're getting started, any advice for anyone out there who is, I guess maybe within their intermittent fasting journey, or they are going to get started on it, that you would like, that you think would be helpful for people at this time?
Yeah. Intermittent fasting is such an exciting topic. There's so many benefits to it, and there's so many reasons why you would want to use it to naturally stimulate the processes within your body that should be happening anyway. But if you aren't going to address your food first, then there's really no point. So I really recommend that anyone who does want to use intermittent fasting, they really take a look at their food first. They make sure they're getting enough protein, enough fat, and then incorporating the fiber in a way that's going to support their specific goals first, at least for a week or so. But for some people, depending on your previous diet and how much you were relying on a lot of sugars or starches, you might even need like 3 weeks in order to get a little bit more fat adapted first. Then using intermittent fasting as the next tool. But intermittent fasting itself doesn't get rid of any of the effects that poor diet can have. In fact, it can amplify a lot of those effects. So addressing the food first. I mean, that's where I share so many free recipes on my YouTube channel, on my blog, and then there's a complete intermittent fasting bundle that lays it out more in detail. But addressing your food first is so priority to make any headway with your goals with intermittent fasting.
And so if people want to check out all your stuff, if they want to buy your bundles, where can they do all of that stuff? And if you can also mention your Instagram handle, which obviously I'll put in the description. But yeah, where can they check out all your stuff, Autumn?
So my YouTube channel, which is where the majority of my free resources are, is just Autumn Bates. So that will have a ton of the things that you just mentioned on there, a lot of information. I think I have like over 300 videos on there now. So it's been quite a while. And then if you're looking for more of like a step-by-step approach for intermittent fasting, that's where the complete intermittent fasting bundle has all of the details of how to implement intermittent fasting properly, the types of meals, how to calculate your protein needs, how to actually properly put together the protein, fats, and fibers, make sure you're hitting everything for your needs. That's all in there, including recipes as well, which that can be found on my website, which is just autumnlnutrition.com, AUTUMNELLE nutrition.com. And then my Instagram is also autumnl_nutrition. So ELLE, not just L.
Amazing. And do you ever, just quickly before we wrap this up, because you do have so much amazing content all the time, and I love that it's short and like I can just watch a quick video. Do you ever think like, oh my God, I don't know what else to make a video on?
Not really, mostly just because nutrition is such a big, like huge topic. There's so many rabbit holes you can go down. And the fact that I do create them into these short, digestible, which is something my fiance really likes to pun about, little pieces of information, it's pretty much endless on what can be discussed. I mean, nutrition is a fairly new medium. It's a fairly new type of study, where it really wasn't even until like the 50s where people started to really focus on nutrition. There was some research on like how obesity happens in like the 1800s and such, but nutrition itself, on how this all comes together, wasn't really even started to be studied until the 50s. So it's always evolving. There's always, like, most nutritionists don't know about the migrating motor complex because it is a newer type of process that was discovered. So there's always so much to be talked about, and it's just, I love learning more about it, even beyond what I've already learned from my dad and from school and from putting it all together myself, that it's just an endless supply of really cool information to dive into.
That's awesome. It's so cool that you have a career based on something that you are like genuinely really interested about and something that can help a lot of people. So I think you're really inspiring.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it's been my absolute dream. So I'm very thankful every day that like when I'm creating a blog post or when I'm creating a YouTube video, I never, if there's a moment where I start to get like, oh, I have to do this, I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I get to create this content where like so many people don't even have the choice on the types of jobs they have or being able to follow their passion. Snap out of it. Like, your job is awesome. Let's get back to it.
Yeah, that's amazing. Or just go outside, get some of them. What are
Yeah.
those ions?
Negative ions, de-stress a bit, go
Yeah,
on a walk.
de-stress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's amazing. Okay, great. Well, I am going to end the recording there.